Some writers are essentially of the type that reacts in excess of the stimulus, making something new out of the impressions, but suffer from a defect of vitality or an obscure obstruction which prevents nature from taking its course. Their sensibility alters the object, but never transforms it. The reaction is that of the ordinary emotional person, developed to an exceptional degree. For this ordinary emotional person, experiencing a work of art, has a mixed critical and creative reaction. It is made up of comment and opinion, and also new emotions, which are vaguely applied to his own life. The sentimental person, in whom a work of art arouses all sorts of emotions, which have nothing to do with that work of art whatever, but are accidents of personal association, is an incomplete artist. For in an artist, these suggestions made by a work of art, which are purely personal, become fused with a multitude of other suggestions for multitudinous experience, and result in the production of a new object, which is no longer purely personal, because it is a work of art itself. And this is from the essay The Perfect Critic by T.S. Eliot, a very famous poet and writer of the modernist era. And he is writing about the kind of art and literature and poetry criticism that was going on at the time in universities especially. And it's very apropos to what is going on in especially English departments, well, all of the humanities departments in universities today when it comes to criticism. Okay, so what is an English degree essentially? I mean, what does an English literature student do at university? Surprisingly enough, most of the time they just write essays that are very, geared towards applying some kind of political lens on a piece of artwork or literature or poem or whatever. And that's what they're trained to do. They're trained to criticize. I wouldn't say they're actually trained to read. They're not trained to get better at reading. They're not really trained to know or identify figures of speech. At least not anymore. I know I got through my degree without... I couldn't even tell you what a simile was at the time. It's not until later that I kept reading and reading that I, study this stuff on my own. Of course, we're supposed to learn this in high school. You're supposed to learn what a metaphor is and a simile is, but who really does? By the time you get out of high school, you've forgotten it. So you would think that if you're studying English literature at a university, that would be like a whole course, and a huge chunk of your degree is to know the techniques of writing, the figures of speech, there's a whole lot. There's a whole lot of them, right? But these things are essential to understanding how a poem or a book works. Why does it work, right? Understanding the artist's technique is essential, and that's just completely vanished from university degrees. T.S. Eliot was one of the four fathers, I guess you would say, of the new criticism. This book is the best of the new criticism. It's basically a brief anthology of some of the better essays from that time. And the new critics were, I want to say the 1940s and 50s mainly. I guess it goes back to the 30s a bit, but they were more focused on identifying the techniques of the poem, as they would say, and deciding whether or not the intended effect or an effect was reached using those techniques. And they were critical of the writing as technique, and not so much you know, did it serve some political agenda, or did it go in the opposite and, you know, cause damage to some group of people? And at the time that T.S. Eliot was writing, the school of thought was really, how does the artwork make me feel? And so he was writing against that. But essentially, that's the same thing that's going on now today with university degrees in English, even history and things like that, and art. But it's disguised as, you know, how would this make some person over here feel rather than you? And so it's more, show me how empathetic you can be for this race of people, for this oppressed people, for this type of people, for this gender of people, which I'm not saying is 100% wrong. That is perfectly fine, but that's what the degree has become. It's completely gotten away from how art is made, and it devolves into opinion, and it devolves into made-up things, which is what this passage is all about, right? What happens when you just put all your emotion into your criticism of a work of art is you basically just create a new lesser work of art, which is what Eliot is arguing here, right? It is made up of comment and opinion, and also new emotions which are vaguely applied to his own life. The sentimental person in whom a work of art arouses all sorts of emotions which have nothing to do with that work of art, right? You're imposing your viewpoint on life onto the work of art rather than deciding what the work of art is trying to communicate to you, what kind of viewpoint the work of art is trying to communicate to you. You're imposing a lens upon it. And Eliot is arguing that works of art basically are creating a lens for you to understand life. You shouldn't be putting a lens onto the work of art to decide what it means. It's been reversed, right? And that's what's going on now. People put a lens, and they use that word, lens, on works of art, and they criticize it through gender studies lens, race studies lens. Those are the two major ones now, and those are the only ones that you can basically do now if you want to get a PhD. That is just fact. You could probably go down the creative writing route to get a PhD in English, but you're still going to be pigeonholed into, what are you writing about? Are you writing about equality? Are you writing about gender? Are you writing about oppression? These are the things that are required now. Now, this is, as much as the term is thrown around, this is not postmodernism. If you read postmodernist criticism, it's more about how art is become almost gimmicky and a reflection of not necessarily oppressed peoples is the word, but it's more how life is manifested in buildings, like architecture. In, like postmodern architecture is all these angles and these lines of sight, and it doesn't have that classical beauty or Gothic beauty of old Europe. It's all angles and straight lines and imposing spaces, right? How is life how is the culture and the arts imposing itself upon the people, right? if you live in a city, the way buildings are constructed and the way art is, found in a town square or a park is all imposing something upon you. That's postmodernism, and it's not really, it has nothing to do with what people claim it does today. But the things that people are complaining about are still valid, because the humanities has crumpled down into a lowly corner of the university. And I have a lot of viewpoints on it. I'm not saying everything that's going on in humanities is wrong, but it's no longer open to a lot of viewpoints. It's very closed off, and whatever. But I think this is a presaged passage here. I mean, this is, I don't know what year this was written. I suppose I could look that up real quick. I'm sure it tells me at the beginning here. 1920. Wow, okay. So, even in 1920, 104 years ago, T.S. Eliot was basically noticing the same thing that goes on today in university, where we're talking about art and literature and poetry and the way it's criticized. It's not really criticized from an objective viewpoint. There's no science to it. It's just, oh, this is how I'm supposed to feel, so this is how I feel, and this is how the work of art made me feel, or this is how the work of art would make somebody else feel, and that's bad or that's good, right? And this gets really tricky when you start reading something from, the 1800s or the 1700s, and you start imposing the ideologies and the political agendas of today onto that artwork, which happens all the time. And that is what a PhD is now in English, and it's absurd. My opinion, and I can have one. This is YouTube. Anyways, I guess, in a way, this is what I try to practice when I make these videos, when I talk about something. I try to find the technique that's being used. I try to bring it up to the surface. I may not be capable all the time of doing that. And then I talk about, how it relates to the book instead of how I feel. I mean, I do give my opinions here and there, but I try to make the bulk of what I'm doing essentially using a new critical perspective, a new criticism viewpoint, which should just be called old criticism now, because nobody practices this anymore. But it's the most fruitful, and it's the most honest, and it's not just full of my own crap that I'm putting onto the works that I'm discussing. So anyways, The Perfect Critic, T.S. Eliot. This is an excellent book, very dense, but a lot of excellent writers and essays in there. So anyways, check it out.